Have you ever wondered what happened in the first hours of the American Revolutionary War? It was a time of fervent whispers, clandestine meetings, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. The dawn of this revolution was not marked by grand declarations, but by the quiet determination of those who dared to defy the might of the British Empire. The American colonies, 13 in total, had been chafing under the British rule for quite some time. The seeds of discontent had been sown by the unjust taxes imposed by the British Parliament, a governing body in which the colonists had no representation. Taxation without representation, the colonists cried out, branding this as a violation of their rights. This grievance, among others, was the undercurrent of the tension that was steadily mounting between the colonists and their rulers. In the backdrop of this unrest, the British authorities in Massachusetts caught wind of a potential uprising. The colonists, they heard, were stockpiling arms and ammunition in Concord. Determined to nip this rebellion in the bud, the British decided to march to Concord and seize these weapons. But the colonists were not to be underestimated. They had formed their own networks of communication, and the news of the British plan reached them swiftly. The colonists knew that they had to act, and act fast. For many, this was a moment of reckoning. The choice was clear: submit to the British rule or stand up for their rights. As the sun set on April 18, 1775, a sense of unease hung in the air. The colonists held their breath, waiting for the cover of darkness. The night would bring the British soldiers marching towards Concord, and with them, the spark that would ignite the American Revolutionary War. Little did they know, they were on the cusp of a momentous dawn, a dawn of revolution that would forever change the course of history. As darkness fell, two men embarked on an urgent mission. The calm of the night was disturbed by the urgent hoofbeats of horses. Paul Revere and William Dawes, two names now etched in the annals of American history, were about to undertake a ride that would echo through the ages. The night was April 18, 1775, the eve of the first military engagement of the American Revolutionary War. The mission of these brave men? To alert the local militias of the incoming British forces. Their ride was not a leisurely trot through the countryside but a race against time, a desperate dash through the darkness. Paul Revere, a silversmith by trade, and William Dawes, a tanner, were unlikely heroes. Yet their determination and courage would prove invaluable to the American cause. Armed with nothing but their resolve and a lantern to signal the British approach, they sped through the night, their horses' hooves clattering on the cobblestone streets. Their path took them through the towns of what is now known as Greater Boston. They warned patriots along their route, their message spreading like wildfire, igniting the spark of resistance. Each stop, each town, each warning brought them closer to their end goal, the town of Lexington, where Samuel Adams and John Hancock were hiding. The journey was fraught with danger. British patrols lurked in the shadows, the threat of capture hanging heavy in the air. Yet, Revere and Dawes pressed on, driven by their steadfast belief in the cause of freedom. Their midnight ride was a beacon in the darkness, a symbol of the resilience and bravery of the American spirit. The warning they delivered would prepare the militias for the battles to come, setting the stage for the birth of a new nation. In the annals of history, their names are often overshadowed by the generals and politicians of the time. Yet, it was their ride, their courage, their determination that turned the tide in those early hours of the American Revolution. Their ride through the night would become a legendary tale of heroism. As dawn broke on April 19, 1775, the town of Lexington became the stage for the first act of this war. The early morning air was thick with tension. On one side of the town, Greene stood 77 American militiamen, a motley crew of farmers and tradesmen, their leader Captain John Parker at their helm. Opposite them, the British Redcoats, nearly 700 strong, commanded by Major John Pitcairn. The disparity in numbers was immense, but the resolve of the Americans was unyielding. The standoff was almost surreal, a moment frozen in time. The British, in their bright red uniforms, a symbol of the Empire's power and dominance. The Americans, in their humble attire, a testament to their determination and grit. The silence was deafening, the air thick with anticipation, a powder keg waiting to explode, and then a shot rang out. It was a sound that echoed through the still morning air, its source unknown. The British, taken by surprise, responded with a volley of musket fire. The American militiamen, outnumbered and outgunned, were forced to retreat. The Battle of Lexington, as it would later be known, was a brief but significant clash. It lasted less than half an hour, but its impact was monumental. When the smoke cleared, 8 Americans lay dead and 10 were wounded. The British suffered only 1 injury. Yet despite the loss, the American spirit remained unbroken. The militiamen may have been forced to retreat, but they did so with their heads held high, their resolve undeterred. They knew that this was just the beginning. The first shots had been fired, the war had begun, and there was no turning back. In the aftermath, 8 Americans lay dead, and the Revolutionary War had officially begun. The next stage was Concord, where the British had orders to seize colonial weapons. As the sun climbed the sky on April 19, 1775, the British troops marched towards Concord, a small town west of Lexington. Their mission was clear, yet daunting: seize and destroy the colonials' weapon cache. Unbeknownst to them, their task would not be as straightforward as they had imagined. The British were met with resistance at Concord's North Bridge. As the redcoats approached, they saw the colonial militias lined up on the opposite bank of the river, their muskets glinting in the morning light. This was the first time the colonists didn't just stand their ground, but actively engaged in combat. The battle at North Bridge was a turning point. It was here where the shot heard round the world was fired. The colonial militias, a band of farmers, blacksmiths, and ordinary folks, stood their ground against the world's most powerful army. The British were taken aback by the ferocity of the colonial resistance. The colonists' successful defense at North Bridge marked a significant shift in the dynamics of the American Revolutionary War. The British troops, outnumbered and outgunned, were forced to retreat. They had expected an easy victory, a swift completion of their mission. Instead, they found themselves in a hailstorm of bullets, retreating from a determined and defiant colonial militia. The retreat from Concord was a long and bloody affair, with colonial militias firing at the British from behind trees, stone walls, and buildings. Despite being a small-scale conflict, the Battle of Concord had far-reaching implications. It showed that the colonial militias were not just capable of standing their ground, but they could also take the offensive and successfully repel the British forces. The Battle of Concord was more than just a military engagement. It was a statement of intent, a declaration of defiance. It was a message to the British that the colonists would not be subdued easily. This victory gave the colonists a surge of confidence, proving they could stand up to the British. The British retreat from Concord was anything but orderly. The Redcoats, having faced defeat at both Lexington and Concord, were now in full retreat towards Boston. But the journey back was a gauntlet of American militia who had heard of the morning's events and were eager to lend their support. The British forces, typically a picture of military precision, were now running a deadly gauntlet. They found themselves beset on all sides, not by a standing army, but by a determined and vengeful militia. The colonists, familiar with the terrain, were able to utilize their local knowledge to devastating effect. They hid behind walls, trees, and buildings, launching surprise attacks on the disordered British column. The British soldiers, trained for conventional warfare, were ill-prepared for this type of guerrilla warfare. It was a long, harrowing 18-mile retreat, punctuated by sporadic yet intense bouts of fighting. The American militiamen fought with a passion fueled by the desire for freedom, striking quickly and then disappearing into the countryside before the British could regroup and respond. The American militias were relentless. As the British trudged on, their numbers dwindled. Exhausted, demoralized, and under constant attack, the British soldiers struggled to maintain their formation and discipline. The retreat, initially orderly, soon turned into a chaotic rout. By the time the British forces reached the safety of Boston, they were a shadow of the formidable force that had marched out that morning. They had suffered numerous casualties, both in the battles and during the grueling retreat. The Redcoats were not only physically beaten but also psychologically shattered. The American Revolution had begun not with a whimper but with a bang. The colonists had shown they were not only willing but also able to stand up to the might of the British Empire. It was a day of reckoning, a day of awakening, a day that would forever be etched in the annals of history. By the end of the day, the British had suffered significant losses, marking a disastrous start to their campaign. The first hours of the American Revolutionary War had sent a clear message. The colonists were ready to fight for their freedom, no matter the cost. In the aftermath of these first battles, both sides took stock of what had happened. A new day had dawned, one that carried the heavy weight of uncertainty, anticipation, and the raw realities of war. In the colonies, news of the skirmishes spread like wildfire, igniting a spark of unity that had been smoldering beneath the surface. This was no longer a distant conflict happening across the sea. This was real, This was happening on their doorsteps. The reaction in Britain was a mixture of surprise and indignation. The notion that the colonies would dare to defy the crown was unthinkable. Yet, the reality of the situation was undeniable. The British were now in a war that was far from home and becoming increasingly complex. In the colonies, the battles of Lexington and Concord bolstered the morale of the revolutionaries. They had stood their ground against the mighty British forces and had proven that they were not to be underestimated. This was a significant psychological victory, a beacon of hope that fueled their determination to fight for their rights and freedom. On the other hand, the British morale had taken a hit. They had underestimated the resolve of the colonists and the intensity of the resistance they would face. The British were forced to reevaluate their approach, realizing that this war would not be won swiftly or easily. In many ways, these initial battles set the stage for the war that followed. They highlighted the stark differences in ideology between the two sides, and the lengths the colonists were willing to go to secure their independence. They marked the beginning of a long and arduous journey, a journey that would test the resolve of both sides and reshape the course of history. In the grand scheme, the battles of Lexington and Concord were but a spark. Yet, they ignited a flame that would grow into a raging inferno, a revolutionary war that would span 8 long years. The first hours of the American Revolutionary War had set the tone for a conflict that would change the world. The first hours of the American Revolutionary War have left an indelible mark on history, a mark that doesn't merely represent a series of battles, but rather, it symbolizes the birth of a nation, the United States of America. These initial hours were not just a prelude to a war, they were the catalyst to a revolution that was not confined to the battlefields of Lexington and Concord, but one that echoed throughout the 13 colonies, sparking a flame of rebellion that eventually engulfed the entire continent. In the grand scheme of things, one might wonder, how could the events of a few hours shape the course of a war? Well, it's simple. These early hours served as a testament to the courage, resilience, and determination of the colonists. They stood up against the might of the British Empire despite being outnumbered and outgunned. This audacious act of defiance set the tone for the rest of the war. It sent a clear message to the British and the world at large. The colonists were no longer willing to live under tyranny. They were ready to fight for their rights and their freedom. The impact of these first hours echoed beyond the war, shaping the formation of the United States. The principles that fueled the revolution, liberty, equality, and justice, became the cornerstone of the American Constitution. The spirit of the revolution continues to resonate in the hearts of Americans, reminding them of their roots and their journey towards freedom. The legacy of these initial hours of the American Revolutionary War is not just a tale of battles won or lost. It's a tale of a people's struggle for freedom, a tale of bravery and sacrifice, a tale that serves as a beacon, guiding future generations towards the path of liberty and justice. Remember, the dawn of this great nation began in the early hours of a single day, forever etched in our memory as the start of the American Revolutionary War and the beginning of the United States of America. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for future content. Until next time, I'm Clump of Cells. Stay informed and love your history.